right, so hello, this is Janine Smith from Mass Mentoring Partnership. Getting our presentation up and running. We are here today for supporting immigrant youth. Oh, started on the wrong slide. So I'm going to get us going in just a minute. I realize that there was some confusion, and this is probably my fault when I first created the webinar. It says 11:30, but I know all of the notices that you got directly from Mass Mentoring said 11. So we have about 18 people here. There are 50-something signed up. I'm going to go through, and for folks, if they join at 11:30, I'll make another announcement, and the recording will be available for all. So I want to honor your time for the folks who are here today at 11 as advertised. I'm going to turn my camera on to say hello to folks, but I'm going to turn it off in a moment after we get through kind of welcome and introductions, because I do think it slows me down, but just so you all can see me and see who I am. So again, hello. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm going to make sure you can see the presentation. So we are, let me just get that up. There we go. And show main screen. All right, so getting going. We are doing our ASOST. This is the, I think, 3rd out of 4th webinar for supporting immigrant youth. I'm here to share a little bit of information with folks, to learn from you all, to share some best practices. And again, given that the time that we're in, it is, obviously a little bit more challenging now. We're going to have some COVID resources at the end of this to share so that we can be relevant and timely to what's going on. But I'm going to go through the content and the material, and then we'll do that at the end. So I'm going to turn my screen off so we can get to the presentation. Welcome, folks. All right. Here we go. So a little bit about Mass Mentoring Partnership. We are a statewide organization who uses a framework of relationships in action. And we do that in 4 ways. So we assess and figure out who is doing the work in the field. We have a biannual survey called Mass Mentoring Count. Some of you may have participated in it, where we ask, who are you serving? And we really try to understand the needs of the field so that we're able to do this work with you. We build capacity through offerings like this, trainings and webinars, and we support you all to continue to do the good work to serve young people. We advocate. We have a lobbyist on staff, so we do a fair amount of advocacy and support programs to connect with their stakeholders, legislators, community members as well. And then we connect. So we really know that there's strength in our network. Our network is over 370 programs deep, and we want to make sure that we create opportunities to bring you all together to share your best practices, because you're the ones who are doing the work. So just some housekeeping here. Everyone is muted for now. So the way that you can participate, because we want to make it as participatory as possible, there's the question kind of box in your panel where you can type a question. My colleague Milani Mendoza is on the line with me, and she'll be popping in to read your questions aloud. And then, if you really want to, you can use this raise your hand, the little hand that you see on your control panel, to let us know that you have a question. If you're really feeling to speak and be heard, we can unmute you and make that available. People typically use the question box section, but we will make those options available, both of those. So any questions, any comments, anything you want to share, whether it's a logistics, I can't hear you, versus I have something to say about the content that's being presented. So that's what we'll use for the duration of our time together. And so just going over our agenda. We're here for about an hour today. So we're going to do some introductions as well as we can, given our remote status. I'm going to set some context and share some terms and definitions, and really go over some of the characteristics of immigrant youth. Think about some supports for immigrant youth. We're going to share a framework that we use at Mass Mentoring. We're going to think about how do I prepare then staff and volunteers to do this work. And finally, some COVID resources that we've compiled to think about how during this specific time we can be as responsive as possible to immigrant and refugee youth. And so our objectives today, we want to recognize the assets, challenges, and experiences faced by immigrant youth, assess programs' ability to provide culturally competent programming for immigrant youth. And when I say that, that's just thinking about using a specific framework. Are we able to do these things, right? What do we need to enhance? What training might I need to offer my staff? What are the ways that we can be flexible and ensure that we're providing the type of programming that this specific population needs? And then again, prepare staff and volunteers to engage immigrant youth in empowering relationships. So right now, my icebreaker, if you will, I'm going to ask you some questions. First, Milani's going to launch a poll. I just want to know where people are coming from today. And so when you see that pop up on your screen, let us know, you know, where do you work? What areas? Metro Boston, North Shore, Cape Cod and the Islands? Are you on the South Shore? Are you in Western Mass? Are you in Central Mass? So go ahead and select one of the following. If for whatever reason your area is not on there, maybe you're not in the state, let us know in that question box. So Milani will keep the poll open for another 20 or 30 seconds, and then we'll close that and see where people are coming from. All right, Milani, if you want to close that poll and share the results with us, that'd be great. All right, so of the folks who are on the line, most of you are coming from Boston, and then 11% from Central Mass. So right now, no representation from Cape Cod, South Shore, or Western Mass. We hopefully, you know, we'll have some more folks joining us and we can fill out this state. And so again, the resources that we're going to share and the discussion we're going to have is going to be very broad, and, you know, will hopefully mean you know, be useful to everyone. But, you know, the resources that we share for COVID, there are some that are regional in there that I think you'll find helpful. So we're going to move on. I have one other question for folks. I want to know if you know, since we're talking about immigrant and refugee youth, where are the young people that you're serving? Where are they from? What countries do they represent? Regions around the world? I didn't want to do a poll because Lord knows there are so many places. But if you know that, if you have some of that information, or if you think that you know some of that information, I would love you to just type in the question box, and you can just type countries, regions, just so we get a sense, and we'll share some information about Massachusetts, the breakdown of where folks are from. But do me a favor and just let us know, where are the young people and their families? Where are they coming from if they have relocated to the United States? All right, have a few people who have responded. If anyone else wants to share, great, thank you. And Milani, if you want to hop in and let us know what folks have said about the locations where their young people are from.
Yes, so we have people from Haiti, Bangladesh, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, Caribbean, so I imagine that encompasses a few places, Nepal, different parts of Africa, and South Africa.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you. Again, we know that our young people come from a lot of different places, and for us, in the way that we approach this, we think about it as a responsibility to not necessarily know all the things about all those places, but to have a better understanding of that experience, so that we can craft programming, craft experiences that support young people to achieve. Actually, I have one other question for folks. Can you tell me in the question box, again, I want to get a sense of what are the settings that you're in? So are folks in after school programs? Are folks, doing in-school programming? Are folks in mentoring programs? So if, you want to share briefly, just what kind of programming are you running? You can just go ahead and type, and then Milani will share out some of those responses. All right, Milani, if you want to share what a few folks have said.
Sure, we have after school and community based after school and mentoring programming, a nonprofit immigrant youth mentoring in school, college, and basically nonprofit mentoring, and they're building a near South Station. That's great.
Oh,
Then we have
great.
also career readiness programming. It's great.
Awesome. Great. So again, coming from a wide range of programming, but we all want the best for young people, and we all want to figure out how do we serve them through relationships, right? And again, we're going to talk about why we believe relationships are a lever for student success, for positive outcomes for young people, and the ways that we might um, adapt that model of relationships for this specific population. So thank you so much for sharing, about where you work, where you're from, where your young people are from. And again, if you have any questions throughout the course, or if there's something you want to, add to the conversation, please just go ahead and type it in that chat box and let us know. So why don't we hop right into some definitions, and this is just a little something that I have found, and I will share this presentation with folks afterwards, and also we have a workbook that we typically use when this is an in-person training, so I can share that as well. But just want to kind of level set us and make sure that we're all talking about the same things, right? So a refugee, any person who for fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a political party or social group, is outside the country of his or her nationality, right? An immigrant, there's no standard legal definition for the term immigrant in the international sphere. The term is commonly used to designate non-nationals who voluntarily cross the border of a country in search for better living conditions. And I think, again, the thing that we want to say here, without politicizing our training, we know that for refugees, immigrants, folks who have left, their country of origin, these are challenging times, right? And so understanding some of those definitions and understanding exactly what those statuses are can be helpful in understanding what those folks are up against, right? And understanding for the youth and the families that you work with, kind of the systems that are at play there, right? Because I think we hear a lot of things about immigrants, we hear a lot of things about undocumented folks, and just want to share some definitions and some terms that can help us have a better understanding. So asylum seeker, person who seeks safety from persecution or serious harm in a country other than his own and awaits a decision on the application for refugee status under relevant international and national instruments. And an internally displaced person or group of people who have been forced or obliged to flee or leave their homes as the result or in order to avoid effects of armed conflict, violence, violation of human rights, and have not crossed an internationally recognized state border. So again, just a few definitions. You see that there are some sources down there. Folks really want to dive into it. The other things when you think about immigrant and refugee use, some delineations and some words that we might hear. First generation immigrant. So that's a young person who has come to live in the United States from a foreign country. So again, we're talking about this context of coming to the US because that is where we are right now. Second generation immigrant, a young person whose parents came to live in the United States from a foreign country. So you might have young people who have just gotten here from wherever, whatever countries, the Caribbean, Nepal, some of those places that you named. And then you might have folks, or you yourself, right? Acknowledging, the diversity and wide range of people who are doing this work, whose parents maybe came and you were raised in the United States, right? Refugee youth, again, a youth that has come to the United States due to a well-founded fear of persecution in their homeland. So the needs of those specific let's say types of immigrants may be different. The way that that young person experiences the world, experiences your program might be different, and understanding that difference there could be helpful. And so this is taken from 2018. So there might be some changes here, more recent data, but this is something that wanted to share where the immigrants in our Commonwealth come from. And again, this is data that has been collected. This is courtesy of MIRA Coalition Fact Sheet. MIRA does wonderful work in supporting refugee and immigrant folks. Also acknowledging that for lots of different reasons, some people are not counted, right? Some people may not be willing to share information depending on their status or citizenship status, and some of the fears they may have in sharing information with folks. So in our Commonwealth, right, and you tell me in the chat box if you want the question box, does this kind of jive with what you know or what you think of when you think of refugee and immigrant youth in our Commonwealth? So this is broad. This is for everyone, not just youth. But number one country is China, right? You see Asia represents 30.3% of immigrants in our Commonwealth. So you have China and India, Brazil third, Portugal, Haiti, Cape Verde, Dominican Republic, Vietnam, El Salvador, and Canada, right? I think we often forget about Canada, our neighbors to the north, and realize that folks are coming from lots of different places. But I think the image that we have of the immigrants and refugees and undocumented folks in our kind of media may not match up to what this list necessarily is, and it may not match up to what we see in our programming, right? So again, Asia 30.3, Latin America, Caribbean actually larger, 35.8, European immigrants 21.2, North America, those Canadians, folks maybe coming from Mexico, 3.2, Africa, 9.1. And so having a sense of where people are coming from, and also, to me, it's also interesting to understand the patterns of immigration. How did a certain group of people get to the community that we're in, right? And for me, just personally, coming from, I'm from the New Jersey / Philadelphia area. When I got to Boston, I didn't even know what Cape Verde was. I was like, what is that country? Where is that from? And I learned a lot coming to Boston, and even I went to school in Western Mass, and understanding that path of migration and how folks got there and why there's such a rich culture and you know, a community here, and how important that is for young people to be connected to that community, and for us who are doing that work to understand those communities and try to build partnerships and relationships there. So if you don't know, you know, that poll question of where your young people are from, understanding and learning about, again, what's your story, how you got here, how, or you know, research is really critical on this too. How did, you know, your family, or how did this community get here? What are the ways that the community celebrates? What are the ways that the community honors its folks? How do young people interact in these communities are really important things that we need to understand if we are committed to doing work with young people, immigrant and refugee youth. And so I won't go over this in lots of detail, but I love it because this is information in the graphic is collected from 25 refugee youth leaders at the 2016 U.S. Refugee Youth Consultations. So as part of the Global Refugee Youth Consultations, which are occurring all over the globe, right? So 25 youth, 14 countries, and they shared, right? This is, you know, thinking about youth voice. Here's some language and some things that we're hearing from young people, right? Top challenges I face: English language skills, discrimination and bullying. And, you know, it'd be interesting, this was in 2016, you know, over the course of 4 years, wondering what that looks like now, again, given, you know, our kind of state and where we are. Education, cultural adjustment. Other challenges include financial, housing, employment difficulties, right? So things that are not specific necessarily to this population, but due to the extra barriers, extra challenges that they may have, you know, these are things that our young people are saying that are problems for them. My experience as a refugee or asylee prior to arriving in the United States. So again, understanding what have some of these young people been through. 49%, and this is of these 25, were separated from their families for 4 to 16 years. 40% lived in a refugee camp. 42% were not able to attend school for 3 months to 15 years. So we think about that loss of learning, the loss of, you know, the opportunity to develop those social emotional skills. You know, the effect of possibly having to uproot yourself and leave the place that you know is home, the relationships that you have at home. 23% were internally displaced. You know, my experience after resettling in the United States, and this is something that I think is really interesting when we think about relationships, 45% say they lived with their biological parents or parent. 24% foster parents from the unaccompanied refugee minor program, 16% extended relatives, family, friends, 15% adult siblings. So if we think about relationships and we think about how important they are, familial relationships, the relationships that they have in their community, in their schools, and maybe their places of worship, once they resettle, of these 25 young people, right? And I think these patterns, you know, we can see across the population of immigrant and refugee youth, 45% are living with their biological parents, right? The remaining 55, the remaining, you know, bulk of these young people are with other folks that they have relationships with, whether they are foster parents, extended relatives, family, friends. And I say all that to say, when we think about family engagement, when we think about connecting with parents, understanding that family may look different for different folks, right? Kinship looks different. You know, folks might be living with aunts, with older brothers, with cousins. And so when we're trying to connect and when we're making those efforts, you know, we might have an idea of, hey, when I think of family, I think of this, versus my young people have different patterns of family. They have different ways that they're connecting in relationship. So again, being mindful and acknowledging that and understanding that and what that means for that young person and the relationship that you're forming with them and their families. And I want to share just some definitions that I think are helpful when we think about supporting refugee and immigrant youth and supporting all young people. And if you've been to any other MMP trainings, you know that we always speak about cultural responsiveness. And so I just want to share the definition of culture and cultural responsiveness that we are using here, because I think, you know, is important. So it's a shared culture, shared learned symbolic systems of values, beliefs, and attitudes, and it shapes and influences our perception and behavior, right? So some of these things, right, when we think about culture, we think about food, we think about dress, we think about music, we think about, you know, even media where you learn these things, family members, right? The attitudes that we have and the way we see the world, our worldview is shaped by this. And then being culturally responsive, how are we, right? And I believe we have a responsibility as youth workers, as people connecting with young people, of genuinely embracing, working with, and continually learning about cultural differences. Why is this important in thinking about refugee and immigrant youth? Because, again, we may not, you know, share a similar background as the young people that we're working with. So as the adult, as the person who is working with and on behalf of young people and their families, we have to make sure that we are embracing and working with and learning about the cultural differences, that we're acknowledging it, right? Difference is not bad. It's a good thing. It's what makes, I think, our world beautiful. And understanding that, again, those beliefs, those values, those attitudes, the way that that young person sees the world has been shaped by a culture that maybe is really different from yours, and you have to understand it to be able to then be in relationship. So again, that's why I say, where are your young people from? How do they engage with the community? These questions are things that you have to figure out how you and your programming, you know, interact and learn those things. I'm going to do one other slide and then pause for questions and to welcome any new people that we have, because it is 11:30, which is the advertised time. So one interesting little, you know, visual that I like to share for thinking about culture is this iceberg concept of culture, right? So there are things that, if you think of culture like an iceberg, primarily on the surface that we think about. You may have seen the onion of culture. I've seen the tree of culture, right? So the same idea that there's layers that you peel back, or there's, you know, things above the surface, and then there are these roots, right? If you're thinking of the tree. So some of the things that we said, cooking, dress, music, games, literature, arts, right, are things that we might see and understand, and it's like, okay, that makes sense, right? Whenever we do, let's say, a culture day, that, you know, I always remember in school, bring your favorite food, bring the food that represents who you are. And those are great ways to have introductions to culture. But really, some of the things that are out of awareness and things that really are deeply embedded in who we are and how we see the world, our worldview, some of these different things I'll read aloud. So tempo of work, right? Body language, here in the United States, I mean, previously to COVID, we shook hands all the time, right? That's how you greeted people, you shake hands. Perhaps that will change given where we are and what's going on in the world, but different ways of greeting, right? Different ways of looking someone in the eye, facial expressions, your concept of self, your roles in relation to status by age, sex, class, occupation, kinship. So all of these things might be different than the way that you have come to understand them and learn them in the context that you're in, whether that's as someone who maybe has been in the United States, grew up here, right? If I'm thinking about myself, I'm a Black American woman who has lived here my entire life, right? So I have a very specific way of looking at the world that's due to my Blackness, it's due to my gender, the way my gender kind of relates. They're all layered and kind of, in there together, but that might be different even than, let's say, a Black woman who is from the Caribbean, right? One of my coworkers, Danielle, some of you may have met her, we would always talk about this, of things that were like, wow, that's similar, but the way that you look at that is a little different. There's some other things that just because we might look the same, we have differences in the way that we approach things. And it was critical for us to have those conversations, and we welcome those conversations. They were interesting. So again, as you're thinking about how am I crafting programming, what images am I using in programming, what examples am I using in my programming, it's important to say, okay, this is my frame of reference, but what's the frame of reference from the young people that I'm working with? So I'm going to pause here. If folks have questions or comments, and then I've noticed we've got some additional attendees, and so I'll take a moment just to understand for folks who are joining us what's going on. So we have started around 11 o'clock because there was, a mistake on my part. I'll admit that, and where the time that we MMP was kind of advertising as 11, the webinar, right, was scheduled on GoToWebinar at 11:30. So for those of you who got those reminders directly from GoToWebinar, you're probably like, oh, it's 11:30 yet we've already started. So I wanted to make sure that we started to honor the folks who are here. For folks who are just joining, I will definitely, this is being recorded, so you'll get a copy of this afterwards so you can catch up with us. We've just been sharing some context setting, and we're actually now going to move into kind of the meat and potatoes of our discussion. So thank you so much for joining us, for the new folks who have joined, and we'll keep plugging along. Are there any questions or comments for people who either have joined or folks who have been with us thus far? Great. So we'll keep going. And this is, again, just briefly, a continuum of cultural responsiveness, some ways to think about where you're at, where your program is at. Specifically, right, you might think of this specifically around supporting immigrant and refugee youth. So I'd like to say in lots of different places, if you look at your program as a whole, there might be one spot that you all are at cultural competence, right? And there might be some other places that you're at cultural blindness. And so I won't read all these out. You're going to get this in your workbook. But the other thing to remember about culture in some of these pieces down here, people are served by varying degrees by the dominant culture, right? There's a dominant culture, and then there are other cultures that, maybe are more marginalized. And so the dominant culture in some way serves us to some degree, maybe not everyone in the same way, but there are ways that we interact with it that provide benefit, and that we have learned to adapt to interact with the dominant culture, right? Basically to survive. Working across cultures enhances the capacity for all, right? So being culturally responsive is better for everyone around. Each group has unique cultural needs. Again, we're focusing on immigrant and refugee youth for this training, but we could be talking about, and we do, I think, maybe a month or so ago, my colleague Cameron did LGBTQ youth, right? So really understanding that not all young people have the same needs. People are, have different kind of groups and places that they sit. They might sit in a few groups, right? And those identities intersect, and it's important for us to understand that. It's just to highlight that slide and move along. And I'll end with this in terms of what's important for us to remember if we think about cultural responsiveness is how do we build skills, awareness, knowledge, and attitude, right? And if we're going in order, if there were order, I would say, what's your awareness? Coming to this training is building your awareness of like, wow, we've got young people from a lot of different places with a lot of different cultures who bring beauty and resilience and assets. And I know that. Great. Now, knowledge. How do I learn about these young people? How do I learn about their culture? How do I learn about their community? How do I learn about their families? And so that, we don't have necessarily, okay, MMP's quick one pager on the Haitian community, MMP's quick one pager on the Nepalese community. We don't provide that, right? Because we know that you're interacting with lots of different cultures and folks out there. That is for you, for us, right? Collective we as youth workers, as people who care about youth, to build that knowledge, right? With the knowledge then comes the skills. We can apply different skills, and we're going to walk through our development relationship framework, which I think helps us with those skills so that we are able to serve the young people better, right? Build our capacity to do that, and that changes our attitude, which is the way that we look at those young people, the way that we look at our programming, the way that we interact. So what we're looking for is a behavior change essentially from us. This is not on the young people. This is not on the families. This is for us to be able to do so we can be responsive to their needs. And this is just a slide. We use this in training sometimes, dispelling immigration myths. I'm not going to take a lot of time on it, but it's just naming some of these things that are in the air, right? Most immigrants are here illegally. Today's immigrants don't want to learn English. Some things that, you know, we have heard, some things that if we're being honest, maybe before we became more aware, right? Before we built some knowledge, we might have said these things in the past. We may have heard our coworkers say these things. So I think it's also important to understand and realize that the young people in our families that we're working with are hearing these things. We will send you the workbook that has some information and research as to why most of these things, all 10 of these are myths, right? To be able to back up. Actually, most immigrants are not here illegally, right? I believe no person is illegal per se, right? And so some language that will be helpful in thinking about how you dispel those myths, right? So what's your responsibility if you hear your coworkers, if you hear, let's say, you know, one of the families that you're working with say these things about, you know, your community essentially. We want to make sure you have the information, the knowledge, and feel confident and comfortable to help dispel these myths so you can create an environment that is supportive for refugee and immigrant youth. And I want to share just really briefly, sometimes we go into trauma just to talk about, you know, this is not a trauma-informed practice training, but to remind us and to share that, you know, the experience again of some of these young people that we're working with who are immigrant and refugee youth, you know, and again, depends on whether they are first generation, second generation, kind of what their situation is. There are some core stressors and some ways that trauma and stress shows up in their life. And so having a trauma-informed approach and understanding that is really helpful. So thinking about prior to migration, some of the things that, you know, we talked about they may be seeing in their country of origin: violence, lack of basic needs, lack of medical care. And I realize this is written from a really deficit-based lens, right? They also have relationships, family, you know, people and places that they love there. Yet, you know, part of what we're recognizing and realizing and acknowledging is that a lot of times there's a reason why, right, folks left their country of origin. They're looking for a better life, looking to, you know, be with family, access, you know, more of their basic needs, get those met in a different place. And so for some young people, they're leaving some of these stressors. During migration, possibly loss of familiarity, right? You know, you're in a new place, you're seeing new things, separation from loved ones. You know, we talked about of those, you know, young people on that one slide from the youth consultations, over half of those young people are not living with their biological parents. Uncertainty about the future. What does the future hold for me? Where am I going? Where are we going to end up? And then during resettlement, once, you know, they get here, once they're in our programs, in our community, discrimination, right? The current climate is not supportive and friendly to immigrants, refugees, undocumented folks' legal status. That whole system, again, I am not an immigration lawyer, that is not my expertise, but I do know that it is complicated and challenging and really hard for families to interact with. And then language barriers, right? Depending on where they are, learning the language, getting used to our systems, the way that we run school, the way that we run programming, right? All of this is new, and that's really, really stressful for young people. That would be stressful for any of us. So reminding ourselves of that and thinking about, how do I have a trauma-informed approach? How do I have a lens for acknowledging that this young person may have been through some things? We may not know, you know, these are just some examples of what may have happened, but having a lens for, you know, trauma, understanding that, you know, we need to be compassionate and have empathy and understanding for working with these young people is critical. And so this is just the definition of trauma. Again, experience or experiences that threaten the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being of a child or adolescent, or of someone really important to that child, critically important to the child or adolescent. And so what we just described on the previous slide certainly fits this definition. And just a quote here from one of our researchers: students living with traumatic situations, including those who might be English learners, likely to experience loss of control and a sense of powerlessness to various degrees. As such, regaining control is crucial to coping with traumatic stressors. And this leads us right into our developmental relationship framework that I want to share with you all. For folks who, may have been at MMP trainings before, this is something that we love to use, and we really believe that is critical in thinking about the type of relationship that you want to have with young people. And it's not just showing up and being there and being an adult, right? That's the first step, right? Being there, being consistent. But there's intentionality to the way that we are in these relationships. So the Search Institute, are out in Minnesota. Some of you may have heard of the 40 developmental assets that comes from Search. They started looking and saying, okay, well, where do young people build these assets, these strengths? And realize that it happens in relationship. Where do young people build social emotional skills? It's through relationship, it's through interacting with their peers, adults, people in their communities. So a developmental relationship is the close connection that powerfully and positively shapes young people's identities and helps them develop thriving mindsets. And a thriving mindset, folks may have heard the term growth mindset. That's what we're talking about here. So for young people to think about what's new, what's next, I'm reflecting on, my experiences, my failures, things that may not have gone as well, and I'm ready and prepared to move on to, the next thing, because I know that my intelligence and my ability is not fixed, right? So for us, being in relationship with young people, to be able to support them, to understand and shape who they are, right? Because they're exploring that, and to help them develop this type of mindset is really important. Before I move into that, I see that there is a question. And Melania, I'm going to go ahead and just read this really quickly. We specifically work with youth living with disabilities. Occasionally we run into culture classes in terms of cultural perspectives of disability. Any thoughts or resources in navigating this particular intersectionality? So we're not going to cover that today per se. What I will say is we can send out some resources afterwards, and actually there's an organization that we work with. I don't think anyone on the line is from Partners for Youth with Disabilities, as I look through the attendee list, but that is a wonderful mentoring youth development organization. They're here in Somerville, and they actually have a technical assistance center that I know has tons of resources, and have been doing work. Actually, a few years ago, we supported them in doing some work around cultural responsiveness and trauma, and I think they've been looking at that intersection there. So I'll be sure to check out and see if they have any resources immediately available, and then can also steer you their way and into the Technical Assistance Center. Oh, I'm from PYD. Great. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. We are acquiring our resources currently still. So they're working on it, and we'll share anything that we find and that we have. Thank you so much for sharing that. My apologies. All right. I'm going to click through. So there are 5 things that, if we are thinking about being in relationship, we want to do for young people. And I'm going to fly through these pretty quickly because I want to make sure we have a little bit of time at the end to go through the COVID resources that I have here, because I know that this is what's present and what is on everyone's mind. We're going to send out, Search Institute has a great worksheet, kind of booklet, that walks through each and every one of these steps, and it also provides more kind of context and kind of reading and research on why all of this is important. So expressing care. This is just basic. Do you like young people? Do they know you like them, right? And I laugh when I say this, because sometimes I'm not sure that we are always great at doing this. In that booklet that I'm going to send you, there's a chart that they have where they've asked young people, they asked 25,000 young people, where do you get each of these 5 elements of a developmental relationship from. And it asks them about parents, it asks them about youth leaders, teachers, and I believe peers and siblings. And for 99%, most of them, they ask them, to say likely or more than likely parents, caregivers. That's where they said they got most things, right? So again, thinking about parent engagement, thinking about who are the people who are the experts on their children. Those are their family, their caregivers. When it came to youth leaders, we're always like, we care about the kids, we love them. You would think that they say yes or, likely or more than likely all of the time. That number, I believe, was around 55%, right? So as I go through this, it's also really important to think about these are the actions that adults should be doing for young people. How are they experiencing that? And that's also where culture and trauma comes into play, right? So the way that we might think that we are expressing care because that's how we experienced it, based on who we are, where we're from, our understanding of what care looks like, could be completely different for someone who maybe has a different background or has different ideas about that, right? So expressing care, we are dependable, we listen, we believe in young people, we're warm, and we encourage them. Providing support, helping them navigate through hard situations and systems. And I think, especially as we think about COVID and think about what's going on, again, this is, it's hard for everyone, but for a population of folks who have additional barriers, whether it's language or access in lots of different ways, these systems, right, and figuring out how to navigate them, we're hearing more and more from programs that we are doing this work to help people just kind of be okay, right? So I also want to say, and we'll go to this, that it might be right now the way that this looks is gonna be a little different. We have to adapt and we have to be prepared to do things a little different in these times. We empower young people, we advocate on behalf of young people, and we have boundaries. Sharing power, something that I think most adults struggle with, right, when it comes to working with young people. Respecting them, taking them seriously, treating them fairly, including them in decisions, collaborating, and just getting out of the way and letting them lead, right? And how do we talked about the loss of power, the loss of control that young people who experience trauma, and thinking about some of the trauma that some of our refugee and immigrant youth may have experienced. How do we in our programming create these opportunities for control? I'll give one example that was always really fascinating to me. I remember working in some programming this is many years ago, and there were young women there who spoke Spanish. I didn't speak Spanish. The people that who ran the programming did not, and so there was one person who would always demand that the young women spoke English. This is an after-school program. Why? Why does that even matter, right? They were talking amongst themselves, right? We didn't know what they were saying, but that didn't matter, right? This was a moment when they felt comfortable to be themselves. There was power there, and I'm speaking this language that's important to me and connecting with someone, building relationship. And in that moment, right, we took some power and some control away from those young women. For what, right? So again, think about why are we doing some of the things that we do in our program, and what are the ways that we can infuse more youth voice and choice into our programming. Expanding possibilities, broadening horizons, connecting young people to others who can help them develop and thrive, and challenging growth, expecting the best, helping them stretch, pushing them, holding young people accountable, and helping them reflect on their failures. So these are the 5 things that all adults should be doing working with young people. Asset-based language, thinking about having that strength-based approach. These are just some statements that you might want to practice, right? I appreciate your willingness to collaborate. That was very insightful thought that you just shared. And so how do you always have a strength-based approach, even when something may not be going well, right? So I can see how much you are enjoying sharing and defending your unique ideas. Right? You may not agree with the ideas. Those ideas may not be on track with what you might be either teaching or going through in that moment, but there's still a way that you can honor and respect and focus on the strengths that young person's bringing. So this is just some research from America's Promise, thinking about a web of support, and it kind of reiterates what we know from Search Institute and the importance of relationships. And so I want to get us to strategies for COVID because we have about 8 minutes left, and I feel like this is something that you know, is important specifically during these times. So you know, from Immigrant Schools, I believe is the way that is pronounced, a resource that, as I was just kind of searching, I found there are some ways that are helpful to supporting specifically immigrant youth during this time. So being understanding, right? And some of that again is how are we culturally responsive? You know, knowing that undocumented families are experiencing unique challenges, it might include being laid off from work, lack of access to benefits, and fears about accessing healthcare, right? Remain understanding in order to support them. Staying informed, also really important. So as much as possible, that we are able to um, know what's going on, know how it impacts the young people and the families that we're working with. Share resources with all families. So if you can share resources via email or text or the ways, whatever ways that you're in communication with families. Some of you might have to go through the schools. We know that there might be some challenges. Also acknowledging access issues, right? Not everyone may have access to internet, to data plans. And so, you know, what we've been recommending at MNP when thinking about our parent engagement and ways to stay connected with folks, we've been, you know, saying if possible, if you were able to, you know, have a plan for connecting with families and try to figure out what works best. And you might have to try a few different things. You want to implement immigrant friendly policies. So this entails not even COVID, but even in your general programming. You know, what are the systems to check out resources and technologies that are inclusive to undocumented families who may not have certain IDs or documentation, right? So even thinking about everything from in your program planning, what are the things that you ask for, right? A lot of times we have a lot of forms, a lot of information that we ask of families, really streamlining and saying, what information do I actually need, right? And why might someone be nervous or anxious to give me this information? Inform families of their healthcare rights. And so this is you know, something that may feel like it's outside of the scope of what you do. If you're able to do this, I think that could be helpful, especially as it's related to COVID, right? So testing and treatment is really important, and access to medical care. And this speaks to the broader piece that, again, we've been hearing about programming's having to shift into resource broker mode, right? So we might have been an after school program that, you know, does math-based tutoring. And so what does that look like remote? Sure. And even to get to the point where we can continue offering the services that we've been providing all along, we might have to shift and provide resources and figure out how we help those families meet just basic needs, or at the very least how we collaborate, how we share the resources with them, that young person's going to at least feel okay as they can, right? To be able to sit down and focus on whatever lesson plan or whatever piece that you're doing. And for those people who are not continuing, let's say, traditional programming, even just check in some continuity ways to let those young people, those families know that you are here, you are connected, that you care about them, that you want to be supportive is really important. Because I think, you know, thinking about how we, you know, ask young people to be in this essentially state of crisis, right? And then continue learning as if like, okay, you just go home and you log into Google, you know, Meet, and we can run classes. I don't know that that's a fair expectation. And so how do we adapt our programming? How do we adapt the models, how we figure out what do our folks need right now, and how can we meet that challenge, even if it means that we are not doing all of that, but we're connecting people with things they need. Things to consider now, right? How are you entering this family? Be prepared to provide clarity, right? So if it's about programming and continuing, right? What services are you prepared to provide? Make sure you listen, right? It might just be a phone call or a text just to say, hey, I want to find out how you're doing. This is new for everybody, and then watch your assumptions, right? We might make some assumptions about immigrant families, immigrant and refugee families and youth that may not be based in their reality. So there's some things that we know, some context that we can have, but also knowing that each family has their individual circumstances. Strategies for family caregiver engagement: reach out to everyone, connect first. Again, define what you are able to offer. And again, this is the same thing. Match support, family caregiver support is looking different. Line up the resources, develop audit questions. How do you know that you're doing what you want to be doing? And honor the limits, right? Not everyone may be able to participate in the way that you were hoping for, the ideal setup that you have or vision for continuing programming, and honoring that there are limitations and, again, barriers that may make it hard. Some new possibilities, new limits. Consider introductions, online activities, trainings, could be helpful for caregiver families. This might put you in more communication, increasing check-ins, honoring family caregivers' involvement. And there's a slide here in COVID resources that I'm going to end with that has, and this is just, I did a quick search and found some of what I thought were the best things to share with you all. Informed Immigrant it is a great guide. It is really extensive that lists out national resources, and also you can go down to Massachusetts-based resources. Immigrant Connections, this is English learner family engagement during coronavirus, so it has some specific strategies and kind of ways, whether it's by video or other online resources in English and Spanish and maybe some other languages that you can share with families, with parents, caregivers, to continue the learning if that's something that they're able to do and that's important for you in your programming. My Undocumented Life, also some resources that range from not just youth specific, but some specific funds that have been set up for immigrant and refugee families, so ways to access money and resources. And then last but not least, and some of these might overlap, this COVID resources for undocumented immigrants. It's a Google spreadsheet, and it's color coded by whether this is a financial resource, whether this is something around accessing medical care. So I found that to be really, really helpful. And it's a public document that you can, share with your families or share amongst your staff, so that you know where to go if in your check-ins, right, in connecting with families, folks have questions for you that perhaps are outside the purview of what your program traditionally is, but at the very least you'll be more equipped to offer support and be in better relationship with those families. So it is 12 o'clock. And we started at 11. I know for the folks who are starting at 11:30, you were expecting to go to 12:30, but I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm going to thank you for your time. If folks have any questions as we're rounding out, please feel free to type them in the question box. That's my information, actually my colleague's information, Cameron Fear. We will email you a survey after this and to give us some feedback just on the training. And also, if folks have resources that you want to share, we would love to have them. MNP, our website, if you go to massmentors.org, on the first page, you'll see like staying connected in a virtual world. We have tools and resources that we've been compiling that are more general, that are also helpful. We have been running some webinars and networking meetings, so the notes from there or the slides are available for people as well. So we did some on closure. We did one on parent and family engagement, and we did just a general kind of networking one. Yesterday, we led a networking meeting for school-based programming, and there were some interesting tips and strategies that came out of there. We're going to have those notes up and out to people, and we'll be doing that bi-weekly. So I think the next one we're doing, they're on Tuesday, so not next Tuesday, the Tuesday after, we'll be discussing what kind of innovation can come out of this moment, right? So I think, it's an interesting time with COVID and thinking about working remotely, maintaining relationships remotely. and realizing that there are some things, some new ways that we're operating that are like, oh, this actually kind of works, right? Or this is interesting, or this is increasing our capacity to do this, or this is allowing us to engage in a different way. And we don't have to necessarily go back to the way things were. And we want to have a conversation with you all about what are those, let's say innovations or new ways of working, new ways of being in a relationship and supporting young people that we want to continue after this is, hopefully eventually over. And then what are the things we want to leave behind? Because there's some stuff that, if I even think about the way that, I work, then I'm like, wow, I can be remote. We do trainings around the state. I usually, we'll go out and see Melania in Western Mass, but doing these webinars and meetings and stuff has been great. And I've been connecting with people that we don't maybe typically all the time connect with, because this allows for more access for some people, right? I'll acknowledge that for some it presents other barriers. So anyway, the conversation will be around that. So please, visit our website. I'm going to send that link. I'd love your feedback, any resources you have to share. You'll get the slides, and I'll send the handbook out for supporting immigrant youth that kind of goes with the full, this is typically about a 3-hour training. So we'll make sure that you get that as well. I see so thank you from someone. Thank you all. Thank you for doing the work that you do. For those of you who are still connected and engaging with young people and thinking about the ways that you can do that, thank you so much for continuing to be there. We will have one last ASOST webinar on, I believe, May 13th, and that one is about healthy closure. So, we'll share what a healthy closure looks like. We'll probably take some of those resources from, our previous COVID quick webinar on healthy closure and help you think through, all right, my program has ended. What does that look like? So I see one other question, and we'll let go. Oh, well, thank you again. So thank you all. Have a great day. Feel free to be in touch, and hope to see you virtually soon at some of our other webinars and offerings. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks.